Good morning, Super Friends. This is Joey with Last Point Gaming. Today is Friday, February 9th, 2018. If you want to connect with us on social media, you can subscribe to our Last Point Gaming YouTube channel. You can friend up our Last Point Gaming Facebook account. You can follow us on Twitter at Last Point Gaming. You can follow me personally on Twitter at Stranger Sparrow, or you can always reach out directly with an email to lastpointgaming@gmail.com. I think that's the best it's been since I added the YouTube. I know I said yesterday I was going to do an episode in the evening, and I did. I don't know. It was a lot of just reiterating things I had said yesterday morning, and I just decided it wasn't worth putting up. But won't be doing one tonight because going out with the guys from work, so we're gonna drop my car off sometime this afternoon so I can just take an Uber home. Which I'm pretty jazzed about. So, I had an exchange with one of our followers on Twitter concerning my thoughts on this article that I talked about yesterday by Thea Miller. Is that? I remember that her last name seemed like a really common last name. This is apparently her first published Magic article, which explains why I didn't know she was a writer for TCG, because apparently this is her first one. She's of course got a lot of flack for it. They had to shut down comments on the article because that's how these things go. The response I got, he straight up said he had not listened to the episode, but he had problems with that article. So I feel like, we had a kind of nice exchange. I think it's okay to disagree with things. I think, considering how you express that disagreement goes a long way towards fostering a good discussion and just, yelling and being obnoxious. I think that's true on both sides. If you've been with me for any length of time, you know that there was a certain other writer that wrote an article on this topic that I have very little respect for as like a writer, as a personality in the community. I don't know the guy personally, so I can't make statements about him personally, but in the way he represents himself, because he's just kind of an asshole in the other direction. You can't make statements like, hey, body shaming's wrong, and then body shame somebody who, admittedly is not well liked in the community. Because you've admitted you have a moral code and it says that this is wrong, so when you engage in it, you know it's wrong. Like, I've never been about that shifting scale of morality based on who your opponent is. Because being willing to sink to that level says a lot more about your character than it does them. So, I think on both sides, if people want to be taken seriously and want their opinion taken seriously, you have to be careful how you express it. And I'm not saying, don't express your opinion. I'm saying that when you litter your expression of opinion with name-calling and, shitty personal attacks, nobody's taking you seriously. I think one of the root causes of why we see things so differently was really expressed by this guy, because, I even talked yesterday morning about how Twitter limiting your character count tends to lead people to strip out pleasantries and niceties that, kind of level out what you're saying, instead of boiling it down to the nuts and bolts that comes across as cold. And because there's no tonal qualities without these pleasantries and niceties kind of sprinkled in through the point you're making, you can come across as being aggressive and argumentative. So I replied to his comment, and I was like, I disagree with you. I think this is the best article that's been written on this topic. He came back with basically, I shouldn't be forced to be friends with anybody I don't want to be friends with, and that's fair. Nobody should be made to feel like they have to engage in a deeper interaction with anybody than they feel comfortable with. You shouldn't be, for realsies, friends with people that you don't feel connected to. And I do admit that the beginning part of this article does feel somewhat hyperbolic. That it's, over 6 months of playing, all these little things. But I think that was the best way to illustrate her point, that these subtle and innocuous behaviors that on their own, in a one-shot vacuum environment, saying, well, that comment was, okay, maybe not the best thing to say, but it was one comment. But then when you add it up, that's where things become problematic, and it's a subtle culture. And, in our kind of Twitter discussion, I took an entire comment block to say, look, I want you to understand that I take your opinion seriously, and I see where you're coming from, and I'm not trying to demean your thoughts on this. I'm not trying to say you're wrong. I'm just expressing my thoughts on it to kind of bridge that gap so it doesn't come across as I'm just being argumentative and abrasive. And his reply back was along the lines of, you can be demeaning and abrasive if you want. I was forged from the school of hard knocks. Back when bullying built character and there were no safe spaces. And this goes back to yeah, all right, I was a Sanders supporter. I totally was. I was really sad to see him not take the primary, because I believe that everybody should have access to health care. Healthcare here in the United States is a for-profit industry, and you're monetizing people's livelihood, people's ability to stay well, to contribute to society. And that just kind of blows my fucking mind that this would be an acceptable thing to monetize. And not okay, well, hey, we got to produce enough to keep the hospital open, right? Okay, yeah, no, I get that. I get why an aspirin costs $50 at the ER, because part of that's overhead cost. But at the same time, that's not really where it ends. It's not about just keeping the roof over the head and the doctors paid. It's about the CEO of the hospital having a multi-million-dollar estate. And healthcare practices in this country are run like any business. So this notion of, I don't want to be paying for other people who can't get far enough ahead in life to have insurance available to them. Well, you already are, first off, because ERs can't refuse to take a look at the patient. and determine determine their need level. So they're still taking resources, and because they're not paying their bill, because, eventually medical bills just kind of disappear. They'll destroy your credit, but their ability to collect on them is pretty limited. It's not like credit card debt where they can, file a civil action suit against you and, have a sheriff's sale on your shit. They can call and harass you, and they can dock your credit score, and it's about the extent of what they can do. At a regular doctor's office, they can refuse treatment for lack of payment, but at a hospital, they still got to look you over. So, everybody's already paying for that because healthcare industry manages shrinkage like any other industry. They jack up the price for the people who are paying. Anyway, I'm not trying to get all political. But I believe in a basic quality of life for everybody. And this isn't because I don't have these things and I want them. This is because I went through, the struggle where I didn't have these things and needed them. And, now, husband and I are in a much better place, income-wise. We're not in the demographic that would directly benefit from these programs. In fact, we're in the demographic that our taxes would likely increase to fund this kind of stuff. But I've been there. I know that struggle, and I just don't want anybody else to have to go through it. So it's the difference between saying, hey, fuck it, I survived it, you can, and saying, yeah, I survived this, and it fucking sucked. So I want to see a better world. I'm not saying either approach is right or wrong, or that I'm better than him because I see things this way. Not at all. I'm a bleeding heart. Sunshine, puppy dogs, and rainbows for everybody. It's what I want. Like, it's been determined if I would ever actually put the time into developing one of these side projects that I have planned, and it would go big, and husband and I would basically go into business on our own, that he would have to handle the business side of things, because I would just give everything away. Because any story that, tugs on my heartstrings, I go, oh, here, the amount of GoFundMes to people I've never met that I've kicked in, at least a couple bucks to, because I read their story and I went, wow, that sounds awful. Let me do what I can to help, because I'm in a position to at least give something to this. It's just my view of the world. I mean, I know I talked about yesterday how part of the reason that I may see things differently is because I was in the trenches of the early days of gaming, where it wasn't cool to be a nerd. Male gamers had societal pressure to grow the fuck up and not spend all your time doing this shit. So it's kind of human nature, when you're miserable, when you feel belittled and degraded, to bleed off some of that pain onto somebody else. It's like, they talk about family roles in families with alcoholics, and how the cycle of, abuse in a family kind of goes from each member dumping on the next weakest member. That being a woman in the gaming arena, I was a special kind of oddity. I mean, even still, by and large, back then, most of the guys in the gaming community were okay, awkward maybe, but you always had that one. that, well, I'm gonna be king of the fucking nerds. Well, you know what that makes you, asshole? Still a fucking nerd, okay? Like, it doesn't make you better than any of us. You're still one of society's throwaways like the rest of us. Oh, but you're king of the rejects. Got it. That I've seen so much improvement. I've seen this shit be taken so much more seriously than it was back then. But it's not well, I survived worse than you, so you can get over it. It's more of, well, this seems so much better. It's like, you know, you used to live in a cardboard box in an alley, and now you have this, like, slumlord shitty studio apartment, and, you know, somebody who grew up, or, you know, is coming from a nice apartment in a nice section of town and fell on some hard times, and they end up in that same shitty slumlord studio apartment. They're like, wow, this fucking sucks. And you're like, what are you talking about? This is fucking great. I have, like, heat and shit. That I don't want it to come across as, I survived it, so can you, where I'm just more trying to explain that perhaps some of my past opinions were colored with the knowledge that things used to be worse. So I've seen leaps and bounds of improvement, whereas, you know, maybe women that are newer to the gaming arena, they see these microaggressions, as she called them, and, you know, they're sensitive to it. And like, wow, that's really shitty of you. Whereas I'm like, oh, you're just gonna ask about my male representative? Cool. I don't know. It's weird. I still feel like the article was a really good read. It is very long, and there are definitely points in it that I value more than others. And it's not even that I don't value the idea, it's that I see potential problems with the execution of the idea. Yeah, I think while being supportive and being inclusive in the arena, I think we also need to keep an eye out for formation of echo chambers and people feeding off this idea that, like, if a female player is questioned and her opponent calls judge and he happens to be a guy, it must be sexism. I think that's a dangerous outlook in life. Because the thing of it is, the reason the judge program exists, the reason we have judges, is because rules questions come up. That's their job, is to adjudicate these things in a neutral manner. So male players call judges on other male players all the time because it's a function of the tournament environment. So to say, oh, well, you just assume that I'm not right because I'm a woman, does that happen? I'm sure it does. But is that always the case? I highly doubt it. I've never felt that a male opponent who called a judge for a ruling that I was playing against did so because he thought I was less knowledgeable simply because I was a woman. Also, even if you think that your opponent's knowledgeable and everything else, there's still no harm in calling a judge. And I have noticed that on coverage, when a judge call is made in a feature match, people immediately go to, oh, they're angle shooting. They're trying to get the judge to alter the game state in such a way that they're not going to lose because they know they're going to lose. My answer to that is, if you are careful on the way you shortcut things and you follow the actual fucking tournament rules, your opponent will either A, not have a reason to call a judge, or if they are legitimately angle shooting, the judge will have no reason to rule against you and say, oh, yep, he's right, we gotta shuffle the deck. But when you get ahead of yourself, when you start skipping through too much stuff, just don't give your opponent that opportunity, I guess. But I think people are far too critical about judge calls. You know, I've done like 2 or 3 bits on it now on, hey, if something's not adding up right to you, call a judge. Have them explain it to you. Because whether it be malicious intent, you know, to cheat, or misunderstanding, miscommunication, I hesitate to use the word incompetence because that sounds really bad or like really aggressive, but you know, if you're just dealing with a player who doesn't know the interactions as well, you want a judge to make those rulings. Trusting that your opponent's saying, oh no, this is totally how this works, trust me, it's not a comfortable place to be in, especially at a tournament where there are higher stakes. Because again, you don't know if their desire to win has outstriped their code of honor. You don't know if maybe they've gotten away with doing this. Maybe they're legitimately under the impression that this is how this works, but it doesn't seem right to you. If they're right, the judge will explain to you why they're right. If they're not, the judge will explain to them why they're not. Also, table spotters, apparently, like, their role is not... I'm having a hard time finding a real definition of it. If you ever find yourself in a feature match and weird shit's happening and you're thinking, well, there's a judge sitting right there, so if this was problematic, they would say something. It seems like you should not, in fact, assume that. And it does kind of make sense because one of the main functions with table spotters is they keep like the life totals updated for the coverage team. They're watching these things for the coverage team so they can announce the stuff that isn't necessarily inherently visible. So while they're focused on all that stuff, it is entirely possible that even if they are supposed to be watching for rules issues and everything else, that shit gets missed in, you know, the kind of hassle of trying to watch all these other things that normally a judge doesn't need to sit and watch. So even if you find yourself in a feature match and something's going on that you're like, this doesn't seem right, and you got a table spotter there, call them anyway. You know, say something to them. Be like, you know, I have a judge question, and they may in fact just call over like the feature match area judge and not try to rule on it themselves. If you see a judge walking around and they happen to be standing right beside you while something weird's going on and they're not saying anything, call their attention to it, because it may be that they just don't notice what's happening, that they're watching so many things at once that they're not processing an incorrect interaction or, you know, whatever else. When in doubt, call a judge. That's what they're there for. And, you know, if your opponent calls a judge on you, don't feel bad about it. Don't feel like they think you're cheating or anything else like that. Just understand they have a question, they're not sure, so they're going to appeal to the person whose job it is to know the answer and who has no vested interest in who wins that match. It's a morning cast, so they're never great. This one kind of went in a bunch of different directions, but I'm at work now, so I'm going to let you all go. As always, if you made it this far with me, thank you very much for listening, and I'm not sure when I'll talk to you all again.